problem, and we're going to walk through it together, okay? So the boy ran 3 blocks. So everyone write 3 blocks.
I didn't even know.
How long did it take him to run 3 blocks? Michelle?
6 minutes.
Very good, 6 minutes. All right, so then we take 3 blocks in 6 minutes,
¿Por qué el niño
right?
corre con los bloques?
¿Qué?
Sí, ¿por qué el niño corre con los bloques?
No,
Okay, so the
corre 3
questions are going to
calles.
go on to ask us, how long will it take him to run 20 blocks? What do we do? How many minutes is that per block?
8 minutes.
Try and remember to raise your hand if you want to answer, okay? And it's not 8 minutes. Michelle?
18 minutes?
Nope, not 18 minutes. Yes, Enrique?
40?
40, yeah, very good. How'd you get 40?
I don't know.
You don't know? Well, 40 is the right answer. How did you get it?
I forgot.
You forgot. Okay. Does anyone know how we get 40? Yes, Moises. Yep, that's right. Very good. Great. Can you tell us how you got that?
40?
Yep, very good. But can you explain to the class what you did here, how you got that? Okay, all right, you guys, sit down.
I feel so dumb.
Joe, do you want to lose your recess?
No.
Okay, then. Thank you, Moises.
Can you help me, please?
Can you take a walk with me? I don't want you to worry about the test, okay, Moises?
Sí, estoy preocupado sobre el examen. La directora Rosa dijo que todo lo tenemos que hacer.
Just try your best, okay? Do you understand? Not importante.
Sí, sí es importante.
You're right, Moises. It is important.
All right. We are back. All right. So here's another strategy that we can use. I'm sorry. Bear with me here.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. All right. Can y'all see it now?
No, can't see it yet, contest.
No. Okay. Bear with me. Sorry.
Okay.
Having some technical difficulties. Okay. Here we go. All right. Can we see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry about that, y'all. So here's another strategy to get your ELLs talking in the classroom. We have the QSSA strategy, where we can ask a question or any open-ended question to get them to use specific vocabulary. We can use signals such as thumbs up to get quick responses. We can use sentence stems or discussion stems to get them to have a structured response. You can have students share with their peers, and this can be done in a reduced anxiety environment. And then finally, we can assess these students in that same environment, and this gives great formative assessment information. All right. Interactive word wall. So again, here's another powerful tool to use during guided lessons. You might recognize the person in the picture there. This was an example of me working with my students as we were doing an expository essay, and they were generating ideas for their controlling idea. This interactive word wall is a powerful tool to get students thinking and writing and helping them to get started. All right, so we're going to take a look at another quick video about why we must teach our educators to use specific strategies in the classroom. Let's take a look.
Teaching for English language learners is good teaching for everybody.
It is definitely about building their literacy skills, but also their confidence. I have a range of students from beginners to high intermediate students. So I use the inductive strategy because it can meet the needs of everyone.
Yes, making connections, because she said the word remember. This makes me remember.
The goal is to make the lesson accessible to all students. You want to see my picture? No. Yes. We don't like your picture. You do like or you don't like my picture? Oh, that makes me feel sad. Background knowledge is not just what students bring to the class and what they learned previously. It's also providing students with the information they need to be able to access an upcoming lesson. Most of the students in my class actually speak 3 or more languages. Okay, English just doesn't happen to be one of them yet, so they're learning. Write it? Yeah, in Pashto or in Farsi.
Fair is not equal, you know, and it's true with differentiation too. I mean, not everybody will get the same exact text or use the same strategy, but it's fair because you're meeting every student where they are and we're helping them progress to the next level.
Okay.
He said he don't like it.
Sometimes I pair students by same proficiency. Other times I might choose a more difficult text, but pair my beginners with a higher proficiency student.
Title, middle school, the worst years.
An easy way to differentiate is to put videos at slower speeds. It's not just a list of strategies. It comes out of building relationships with students. When I was first learning Spanish, I was very scared. Create an environment where students are willing to risk, where people can have a sense of humor. 2, 4. I teach English, not math. 2, 4.
I think of differentiation more like a mindset than on Tuesday I differentiate. You're constantly thinking, how do I make this accessible to everyone?
All right, last step.
All right.
And Tessa, before we go any further, there's a question in the audience. Mr. Butrego has a question for you.
Yes. What's that question?
You can unmute, Mr. Butrego. Mr. Butrego, you can unmute.
Okay, I think we had our think wait time. Let's go ahead.
Okay.
All right. Well, whenever he gets a chance, we'll
Circle back.
answer that. Yeah, we'll circle back. All right. So English language learners in special education, these students are dual coded. So 16% of English language learners in the US have disabilities. And that means that all of these students require an individual education plan. That's about 830,000 students, which is a lot of students that need much support. Now, this is the breakdown from the state perspective. We have states such as New Mexico, Wyoming, Illinois, New York. Those have greater than 20% of students with disabilities, and they also have language barriers. So this graphic is a really good way to show the growing need for support for these students in our classrooms. So who are ELLs? These are students whose primary language is not English. They need our support to achieve proficiency, and they come from diverse backgrounds, and they're at different stages of their English acquisition. Schools will evaluate these students using 4 different strands. They look at the speaking, listening, reading, and writing supports, and we provide that through ESL programs. Many of these students are newcomers. Many of them have multilingual or have multi-languages, and some of them are long-term learners where we monitor their support. Either way, federal and state laws require that we give them the instruction that they're supposed to get. That law that required that was Law versus Nichols. Back in 1974, the US Supreme Court ruled that language barriers can't prevent access to education. And any school that received federal funding must provide that ELL support. This law established the foundation for what we see in the classroom today with bilingual education. So I've been using that term ELL quite a bit today, and it's changed a lot over time. In the beginning, when the law first came out, we referred to these students as non-English proficient, but that steadily changed because that showed the weaknesses in our students. As we progressed, we came up with the name of limited English proficient, and that also recognized that they had some proficiency in English, but again, it still kind of made their weaknesses stand out with their languages. So the word we use now, ELLs, that is based on our current law. And sometimes you'll hear us refer to these students as multilingual because we want to acknowledge the diversity of their language abilities. So more challenges with that term. It focused on the limitations rather than their strengths. And there's more of a shift now as looking at having multiple languages as an advantage and not a deficit. So who are these students? There's more information about them. So Spanish is the most common home language for English learners in 45 of our US states, including DC. In 5 of those states, though, other languages are spoken. So for example, in Maine, Somali is the main or common language, and in Vermont, Nepali is the main language. But here's the big fact here that we want to get out of this. Nearly 60% of US ELL families are low income, and that's alarming. So these students are concentrated in schools that have the same language. They have high numbers of low-income students. Oftentimes, teachers are unqualified. They don't have the adequate. Moreover, in 2022, about 5% of Hispanic students in high school, ranging from grades 10 through 12, they dropped out. I mean, even though that number is decreasing, it's still alarming that that many students are dropping out of high school. We'll talk about that a little bit more with disparate impact. But before we touch on that, I'll go into disproportionate representation of students who are dual coded. Are these students under or overrepresented? What are the reasons that it's disproportionate, and how do we determine it? We're going to look at that from the state, district, school, and classroom level. So this information here provides us with telling us that 11% of public school students are identified as ELLs. That's about 5 million students, which is a lot of students needing support. It did increase 9% since 2011, so that number is going up steadily. The lowest numbers were reported in West Virginia, and the highest numbers at 20% are in my home state here in Texas. And according to the Department of Education, about 16% of ELLs also had disabilities. So is the issue of disproportionality, is it because of inappropriate placements? Now, I'm going to speak to overrepresentation and underrepresentation as it relates to this subpopulation. And then just a little later, Horace is going to chime in and he'll talk to us about disparate impact. Now, with regards to overrepresentation, these students are often overrepresented in special education, meaning that their language barriers lead them to being misidentified as having a disability. On another note, they're underrepresented in those gifted and talented classrooms because of the biases and the assessment limitations that prevent us from seeing what they can do in the classroom. Horace, you want to talk to us a little bit more about that disparate impact?
Thank you, Contessa. Appreciate that. And so when we're talking about the disparate impact is when the policy or practices seem neutral but harms a specific protected group of people. And so disparate is the difference in outcomes between groups, while disproportionality is when one group is out of proportion to another. Both terms are often used to describe social economic conditions, especially related to race and ethnicity. And so you see that. So let me give you an example that we could all wrap our minds around as educators. So disproportionality, Black and brown students in Detroit Public School, I'm just using an example, or a random school district. There's a disproportionality of Black and brown students that are in special education in these school districts. But here's the disparate impact. When special education is supposed to be used to help bring equity to the student, but instead the student just goes all the way through their elementary years, early elementary years, their middle school years, their high school years, and end up leaving high school not with a diploma, but with a certificate. And so what then happens is, when we talk about this from an economic standpoint, instead of getting a diploma, a high school diploma, and then going on into education, higher education, which will set the tone for a good paying job, we're grandfathering our Black and brown students into poverty. Contessa.
Thank you so much for explaining that for us, Horace. We appreciate that. So moving on, what do we do before we refer these students? There's a couple of things. First thing, we want to improve general education teacher training. We want teachers who can teach a diverse student population. These ELLs come from diverse cultural backgrounds, and they're also living in poverty. So we need teachers who can support them. We can also use data-driven results. We can collaborate with our ESL teams and our special education departments. We can use school-wide interventions such as MTSS, and of course, we want to use those appropriate language supports. With regards to parent and community involvement, that's crucial because we want to make sure that we're knowing every child by name and need. So here are some more strategies that we can use to identify these students properly. Some that stand out to me are observations. Teacher observations are crucial. And of course, parent interviews, because the parent will have information on that student that the teacher may not have. So why? Why is limited English proficiency status important? I'll explain the different levels of proficiency here, but in just a few moments, Horace will drop in the chat the language proficiency descriptors, which talks about all the different levels the student would have based on their level. So when a student is less than 1 year, we consider them a newcomer. And then there's lists of all the things that they're able to do at that time. When we look at students who are 1 to 3 years, we consider them to have beginning language proficiency. And so we would provide those supports as needed. And then finally, when we have students with over 3 years of language proficiency, we call them long-term limited English proficient, and we monitor these students just to make sure that there aren't any needed supports. So the next steps in determining how we can support these students, we want to just look at all the data. That's basically what this slide here is talking about. Now, MTSS, that is a school-wide intervention that is crucial in making sure that we provide the necessary supports for all students. There's 3 different tiers here, and I'll speak to those, and later Horace will chime in a little bit about this as well. I'll start with tier 1. That's that universal support. You'll typically see that in the general education classroom. That is that culturally responsive instruction that's provided to all students. We want to make sure that any ELLs are receiving their necessary supports. We'll differentiate that instruction and use data-driven assessments. And of course, we want to make sure at this stage, we want to look at whether or not it's language that's the barrier or whether we suspect something further or a disability. If the student's not responding to those interventions, we'll move into tier 2, which are more targeted interventions. These are typically done in a small group. And it is at this point that we determine if there's any more services needed. As we move into tier 3, those are going to be your intensive interventions. Those are going to be individualized. It's tailored to support the unique needs of the student. We definitely want to make sure that we're using those multiple sources of data as well. And at this time, it may be necessary to refer the student for special education services or use any wraparound services as needed. Horace, do you want to chime in on this?
Before I chime in, Contessa,
Yes.
we have Mr. Fisher that has a comment.
Yes.
Hey, thank you for calling me. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sean Fisher, proud CEO and owner of the Fisher Educational Consulting Group. And I just thought we're a little bit ahead of time, so I thought this would be a great moment to chime in and just add some of my lived experience. So just a general rule of thumb, and you may want to capture this in your note catcher. There are general percentages that go with MTSS. So your tier 1, every teacher should be using those. That should resolve 80% of your issues for 80% of your students. Your tier 2 targeted interventions should reduce or address about 10% of your needs. The remaining 5% will be addressed by tier 3. One thing that I wanted to piggyback on or circle back around to was a statement that Contessa said, which was, she said at tier 3, you may look at referring for special ed. Absolutely correct. However, we want to emphasize that it is not synonymous with special education. Tier 3 students might just need tier 3 support. They may need more support, one-on-one, extended day, those type of things. It is not automatically synonymous with special education. Very often educators and education leaders make that mistake, and that contributes to the over-referral of certain students, because we need to go that extra step and intervene a little bit more, but instead we get lazy or we stop short and we just say the easy route, let's evaluate them for special education. Yeah. And then circling around to what Horace said earlier, once students of color get into that track, specifically Black and brown, our Asian students of color, they're in and out of special education, just like our white students. Once they're in that cycle, they don't end up coming back out. Once by the special ed, they're not decertified. So they'll graduate. If they graduate, in some states like Michigan, they can receive special education services until they're age 26. So what they do is leave high school and they transition into a center-based program, right? So we don't want to, as Mr. Stone said earlier, Horace, we don't want to grandfather them into poverty. But more importantly, we want to use the MTSS system to just give them what they need so they're successful. And then when they don't need it, we need to pull it away, right? Like special ed, 504 services, those type of things, they're not forever. They're just to meet that need. So everyone keep that in mind. You want to have a growth mindset where you're like, we give them this as long as they need it, then we pull it away because they have a right to, compete unaccommodated. Okay, thank you. I'll hand it over to Horace.
Well, thank you, Mr. Fisher. I mean, you gave clarity. You don't have to go any further. Yeah, we just want to make sure. And the only thing I would add to that, in different school districts, it might vary as far as the tiers. We might have 3, 2, 5 tiers. And the reason for that, again, is to make sure that we are able to service our scholars and give them the very best. Contessa?
Thank you. Thank you guys so much for that clarification. All right, so moving on. So a determination of language evaluation, it can be done based on the previously outlined categories. Any newcomers should be tested in their native language if possible. And then all other language learners should be tested in both languages if appropriate, and especially if we are suspecting any disabilities. So what should the IEP team do first? Section 300.533 basically says that schools have, or teams basically, have the right to review existing data to determine if the child has a particular category of disability and whether the child needs special education and related services. So that law allows us to do that as educators. And of course, we want to make sure that we're always including the bilingual and ESL service providers in on that process. So categories for evaluation of language, these are just a few of the disabilities outlined by IDEA. However, I do want to specify that although speech impairment, specific learning disabilities such as dyslexia and autism, those are the ones that I typically see in the classroom. This is basically saying that if you suspect these disabilities, we should do a language evaluation. But a good rule of thumb is no matter what the disability is, it's best practice to do both language and special education testing at the same time. So there are sometimes evaluation issues such as difficult language and difficult answer choices. But either way, we want to make sure that we're training our personnel to have interpreters that can relay that information properly. And as we're working and training our special education personnel to work with interpreters, just a few things to be mindful of. Trained interpreters are much more effective in translating the message accurately. Oftentimes, language line and things of that nature are an option if there is no other way to convey information to the family. But if we must, it is best practice to train those interpreters so that we can produce the best results and convey the best message to our parents. Now, as we plan for special education and related services, we'll want to link any of the testing to the IEP. We'll link the languages to that IEP, and we want to continue to provide any language supports as needed. And what else can you do? We can continuously review all the information that we have on our language learners. We'll continue to use that collaboration with bilingual and ESL personnel. We'll keep our special education teams trained so that everybody is on the same page. And now with that, I'm just going to solicit the collective wisdom of the audience for any strategies that you guys think we could use. Are there any questions?
Actually, I'll jump in just really quick while everyone's processing and thinking. So one thing I want to emphasize for everyone is the statement was made earlier in the presentation that these strategies are good for everyone. So I've had the pleasure of being a middle school principal for 6 years. I was middle school principal of a school that had 40% English language learners. And what we chose to do, and also I was principal of a school that was 70% free and reduced lunch. 20% of that 70% were classified as deep poverty, which is 200% below the poverty line. And what I can tell you, looking at both schools through a Title I and Title III lens, Title I being students that are in poverty or having high needs, and Title III being immigrant learners, or the law says limited English proficiency if you're applying for a grant or you're applying through federal laws. In education practice, we use the term English language learners, and the program is ESL, English as a second language. So just want to make those differentiations. At the point where we have 40% English language learners, we decided just to incorporate English language learner strategies just for all of our students, because we realized that students in deep poverty had limited vocabulary and deeper understanding. So those strategies just worked, right? So all of our teachers use content and language objectives. They just opened up with those, right? They use sentence stems for all of our students, and it built vocabulary. I can even tell you myself, growing up as a child of poverty, there was limited vocabulary. Even though at this point I have 4 degrees, I remember being in an environment with people who grew up wealthy, and we were sitting having dinner, and they pointed at a table and they said, could you pass the carafe to me? And I was like, what's that? And then someone actually pointed to it, and I was like, oh, that's a picture. And they all started laughing because they thought it was the funniest thing in the world. And then they had an outer body moment where they realized that they were laughing. I was the only Black person at the table. And immediately they realized that they had grown up wealthy and I might not have, and they all began to apologize. But it wasn't that they did it on purpose. It was just that they grew up in a different environment. So we know that poverty may limit vocabulary, right? We know studies say that the average adult that grew up in poverty possesses a vocabulary of anywhere from 20,000 to 40,000 less words than someone who didn't grow up in poverty. So keep that in mind when you're coming back to your campus and you're planning on how to disrupt learning gaps. You can actually plan for your students of deep poverty and your students that are English language learners. You can plan for them the same way, right? And even when you're doing your small group instruction, you can have so if you have someone like Contessa who is ESL endorsed, but also ELA endorsed, you can have them group non-English language learners and English language learners together, because very often you'll find that they have some of the same learning gaps. All right, I'll pause there and I'll turn it over. I think everyone's had enough time to process and think of their questions, so I'll turn it back over to the audience. All right, do we want to engage in poor instructional practices and just start calling on people? You know, we're not supposed to do that, but do we want to do that?
Go ahead, Mr. Elam.
Good evening, everyone. I know that in Georgia, many educators use the WIDA standards, and that actually both versions have come out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and so they do provide just a lot of practical strategies. And like you said, Sean, just like a lot of special education strategies, a lot of these strategies and best practices are just good for a lot of students. Any type of student who's having difficulty accessing the learning. And so those are just some strategies that we're able to use here, looking to WIDA.
And following up with Dr. Williams, she's exactly right. And a lot of your general education students or teachers will not be able to interpret the WIDA. So for my educational leaders here, when you're doing your scheduling of your English language development specialists, that's what they call them on the West Coast, your ELL teachers here, give them a couple of preps, because that serves as drop-in time for general education teachers. So they can come in and when they're doing their lesson plans, they can learn how to support those students. Because it's not necessarily unless it's specifically in their learning plan, it's not the job of the English language development specialist to come in and teach those students, but they are there to help you make accommodations. So give them that extra time so they can serve as drop-in, or they can push into a teacher's conference hour and work with them. That's just if we have any instructional leaders here. That's a little tip right there from personal experience. Thank you, Dr. Williams. I saw there was a hand up. Miss, I think last name was France. Do you want to read that or ask her to unmute?
We also had Steve, Mr. Steve Elam, who had their hand up also.
Yeah, I'll let you guys do Miss France, and allow her question to be answered. Then I'll join after.
Thank you,
France,
Steve. Yeah, my question is around students with limited or interrupted educational experiences, and
where are you from, Mrs. France?
Portland, Maine.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So we have students that come to us. Many of our students come to us with, interruptions in their schooling. And we really work hard to compare them to their true peers with similar cultural and linguistic and experiential backgrounds. But we find our special educator colleagues really struggle with those exclusionary factors and holding two truths at once, that yes, they have experienced interruptions, but they simultaneously potentially could also have a disability. And how do we move through that process with colleagues who may not be able to really feel confident moving forward with those, like eliminating those factors to the extent you can? Does that make sense?
It does. It certainly does. And I'm happy to take this question. So, and I want to be clear, Ms. Franz, you're asking, you have educators or special education teachers who are not comfortable with supporting them because they don't feel like they have the information that they need or the support they need to pull the students up. Is that what I'm understanding?
I think more so comfortable in moving beyond a step one and determining evaluations and assessments for moving forward to try to determine a disability. That they kind of get stuck at that step one IEP meeting, can't move beyond the interrupted education, and that maybe that's not the sole reason why the student is struggling, given all of the other instructional supports and appropriate tier 1 and tier 2 things that have been put into place. Like, how do we move past that point of tension and getting stuck? Because compared to their true peers, seems to be something bigger going on than just their lack of educational opportunity.
And I would say that in that case, through your assessments, through your formative assessments, your summative assessments in the classroom, I would just see where is this student, and then based on where they are, I would work within that realm, because obviously we can't move them to another level if they don't have the foundational skills, whether it be in reading or math. So my approach as a special education teacher is to build them up from where they are and work within that. The IEP should support their ability to do that. There shouldn't be any stressors from any state exams or anything like that. But yeah, we have to kind of still just work where the students are, even though pushing them is an option, but we still have to give them those foundational skills before we can move to the next level. Sounds like an MTSS thing to me. Mr. Fisher, Horace, what do y'all think about that?
Yeah, I'll jump in really quickly. One of the things that I was going to ask would be, Ms. Frowns, have you ruled out the social emotional piece? Because we know that that's part of MTSS as well, if we think about RTI.
Yes, we do have some pretty extensive systems and structures in place for sort of addressing and supporting those extrinsic factors around acculturation and sociocultural linguistic type things, social emotional, all of those pieces. And I think our ESOL teachers are really good at gathering that information. I think there's that tension between ESOL teachers' expertise and special educators' understanding of the law, and they're working within a system that's not really designed for our multilingual learners with potential disabilities. So I think that's the tension around eligibility.
And that's why, and this is a new area it's burgeoning. And that's why we attempted to broach this, and when we did our research and surveys around the nation, we found out that this was, almost a never shall the two ever meet. But we have students that are both special education and they are English language learners, so they needed the support. And then if you add in the intersectionality of racism as well, or race, that's a third leg of that, right? So those are things that we were saying. But I wanted to say the reason why I asked about the cultural piece, or not the cultural piece, the social emotional piece, is at my particular school, we had a large influx of Syrian refugees and Iraqi refugees who had been, part of the definition of newcomers are that they haven't had traditional school experiences. So we had quite a few students that had made it to middle school age, but had grown up in a war zone, right? And so they could recognize the different villages when they showed up to the schools, and those villages, for lack of better words, had confrontation. So the kids never fully focused on learning because they couldn't shake where they came from and those violent histories. So it wasn't until we were able to get parents up and we talked to them and they explained that, this person's from this village and they had rivalries for like decades, but we had to explain and teach them that that wasn't the case here at the school. And then once we were able to address those social emotional needs, the learning started to take place. I know that what you're specifically talking about is a deficit in the teacher's ability to deliver proper instruction. But I also just wanted to say that there are some things that students might be showing up with as well. So while you're addressing the teachers, make sure that you're also ruling out things that may be affecting those students, especially if they're newcomers, because by definition, they've had disrupted learning.
Yeah, thank you for that point. It's important perspective. We are seeing a lot of our students arrive to us with interrupted enculturation in their own home languages and cultures and experiences with their families as they're moving across multiple places before arriving to us and not really developing those native language and literacy skills or having the opportunity to do so. So I appreciate that point. Thank you.
And Ms. France, the last tip that I would offer is our school had developed a parent-teacher home visit program. That's very important, especially for your English language learners. Find someone who knows their language and do a home visit, because you may find out that the parents as well are illiterate, even in their own language. And so that would, we know that family literacy impacts the learner's literacy. So those kids may, we assume that they're literate in their own languages, which makes it a lot easier to teach them in English. But if they're not because you have something to compare and translate. But if they're not literate in their own native language, then you can't even make the translations.
Absolutely. I'll just shout out to Portland, Maine. We have an amazing multilingual center and family and community engagement specialists who provide a tremendous amount of cultural brokerage for our staff and our families and communities. And they're amazing at supporting that connection from home to school. And I absolutely agree with you about how essential those home connections are. Thank you all.
Mr. Elam, you had a question, right?
Yeah, well, I had a follow-up statement and even some more suggestions. Definitely delivering sound instruction using the sentence stems, graphic organizers, and word walls are so pivotal. When you're just my experience just this past school year being K-8 at 95% English language learners, I've learned very quickly newcomers and the different tiers of English language learners. And what I put earlier is the importance of understanding an inverted triangle. So when you have 95% of your students fall into that tier 3 category, then what do you do? So along this process, what we have done is we really zeroed in on delivering professional development around delivering sound instruction and sound instructional practices such as sentence stems, word walls, and graphic organizers. And we all know across the country, we're dealing with the deficit of just getting certified teachers, let alone certified special education teachers. And then the other unicorn becomes the certified English language learner teacher. So in this process, definitely doing what Sean has suggested, which is staying in full communication with your parents. And actually, we actually removed what I want to say. We took out a class and just made it, we call it WIN. It is what I need. And actually listening to students, circling up and finding out ways to help support them, because many times our students come with different traumas, even from their villages, from for us as an instance in Southwest Detroit, always thinking individuals are coming from Mexico. No, they're coming from Central America. They're coming from all these different cultures. And now what you'll learn is that they too have, what Sean just pointed out, the parents, the household is actually functionally illiterate in their native language. So now what we are doing is putting them in a United States mind and framework of, which is our middle class values that have been pushed down. And then we do the testing, we do all the rest of the other things, but we eliminated, not necessarily eliminated social studies, but what we looked at, we call it WIN, what I need. And we actually train with the teachers literally once a month to circle up and zero in on one, listening to the students, and then reaching out with parents, inviting them. The school is always having like a parent meeting per grade band, because what we recognize is it's easy for K2 because their language is already limited. It becomes difficult at the middle school level where they are 13, 14, and they've experienced the different traumas that have happened in their native countries. And now you're thrown into the United States and you're a newcomer and your language might be Hmong, which is a Native American language. And what we're thinking is Spanish. No. So all the different, just this school year, I've learned so much, and I'm appreciative of the PSYOP models and definitely Marzano, some of his instructional strategies, which are just sound practices that help all students focus in. That graphic organizer is just awesome because it allows the kids to write the language. Teacher has to then practice saying the words, the coding, and then it gives them an opportunity when it's placed on the wall. That interactive word wall gives the opportunity to revisit, and they can see themselves progressing. You know, as we close into the, right now, we can go on spring break in a minute. In the process, you see the teachers that are doing it with fidelity, the walls are covered. And you can tell when they do the NWEA or the iReady test, the kids' vocabulary enhancement is grown. And then you step into another classroom where, just like we talked about the teacher observation, where the teacher is still, they're picking up the pace, but not as fast as the teacher next door. So those kids aren't growing as fast. But what I recognize being a school leader is just being consistent with getting in, being observing, and giving feedback. You know, you want to give the teacher the feedback to help them grow as they help the students grow. But I really appreciate this because Contessa, you've done a great job in explaining the data, and especially that all English language learners come with their own deficits. And we too, technically, and me being an African-American man, I'm an English language learner too, because we learn how to code switch at an early age.
That's true. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that.
Mr. Fisher?
I have to really quickly just call someone out. And I was hoping to see this as I saw the registration. I think I saw Sarah Weeks. Are you logged in? I think I just saw.
Oh, hello. Yes, I am logged in.
This is pretty cool. Can you tell them where you're logging in from?
Yes, I'm in South Korea right now, and that's why I had turned off my sound and video, because it's 7:30 in the morning. So I'm trying to like get my sons ready for school. I have to get ready for school. But yes, okay, we'll wait in a minute. But I just wanted to pop in as much as I could, because I was really grateful to see this webinar taking place, because obviously over here I just teach only, English foreign language learners, but I teach at the university level, so they're a little bit, they're older than I think most of your student populations, and we have we don't have the same systems like with IEPs and everything like that. But I had one question, and you might have addressed it earlier, but when I was teaching in the States, working with a university to help students improve their English enough to the point that they could get into a university, I had some students that I really felt were probably on the spectrum, but if the student or the parents refused testing for some reasons, like sometimes it was a cultural reason, I just wondered if you had any tips for helping the students with those, like in those kind of situations where they may not get, for example, extended testing time or other accommodations that, maybe I felt they should get, but because they didn't get tested, then they weren't eligible for them. So that was one of the things that I wanted to ask about. And thank you so much again for having this. Okay, just a minute. Mommy's gonna turn the sound off.
Absolutely. Were you going to take that question?
No,
Mr. Fisher, I'm
I'll defer to your expertise. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, in a situation where the parents are refusing services, but the child clearly needs the support. So in a case like that, although you may not have the legal, paperwork or IEP to support what you're doing, you still have to do what you need to do to get the kid to learn in the classroom. So what I would do is I would still provide the student with the supports that I can provide in the classroom. If the student needs me to read the passages, I'll do that. If the student needs a calculator, I'll provide that. I don't know how we would get around the parents' denial, because once they deny services, that's that. You can even try to possibly push for maybe 504 or something else less invasive, but I err on the side of just giving the student what they need in order to learn. That's how I would handle that situation.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. Yes. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry I can't participate as much as I would like to.
Oh, you're fine. Thank you.
At this time, we have, and thank you for that comment, Contessa, and also Ms. Weeks for that question. Ms. Jenkins, would you unmute yourself, Dr. Jenkins?
Yes, I did. There's something that's really disturbing me. Critical mass is extremely important. And Ms. Contessa, when you did your presentation, okay, how many Gen Ed students did you have in the class with your ELL learners? To create pair shares as well as small groups. And let me frame why I'm asking this. And one of my assignments, my background is mathematics, and watching and using the techniques that you described. When you have children, if you don't have a critical mass of students that are on grade level, and then you have the small groups and the pair share,